Welcome back, seeker of hidden knowledge, to another journey through the shadows of Tamriel's history. Tonight, we descend into the secret hierarchies that structure Daedric worship across the continent, the priest rankings, champion selections, and shrine operations that transform individual devotion into organized cults. From the Mythic Dawn's apocalyptic cells to Nocturnal's eternal Nightingales, from Namira's cannibal feasts to the regional variations that make each cult unique, we'll explore the mortal structures built to serve immortal princes, revealing how devotion becomes organization and how worship becomes power. In the darkest corners of Tamriel, where torchlight flickers against ancient stone and the air grows thick with incense smoke, the servants of the Daedric Princes gather in secret devotion. These are not the gods of the divines, distant and benevolent, but the princes of Oblivion, capricious, powerful, and utterly unconcerned with mortal notions of good and evil. And like any faith that has endured through the ages, Daedric worship has developed its own intricate structures, its own hierarchies of power and devotion, its own carefully guarded protocols for approaching beings who exist beyond the mortal plane. The position of high priest or high priestess in a Daedric cult is not simply granted through bloodline or political maneuvering, though both have played their parts throughout history. Instead, these positions are earned through demonstration of absolute devotion, through trials that would break lesser mortals, through the willingness to sacrifice everything, including one's own humanity, in service to a prince's whims. A high priest of Boethiah might have proven themselves through orchestrating the perfect betrayal, turning trusted allies against one another in a demonstration of cunning that pleased the prince of plots. A high priestess of Namira may have embraced the most revolting acts of consumption, her very existence becoming a testament to the beauty found in decay and revulsion. Beneath these exalted positions lie the acolytes, those who have pledged themselves to a prince but have not yet proven their worth through deeds of significance. The training period for a Daedric acolyte varies wildly depending on which prince they serve. Those who would worship Hermaeus Mora might spend decades in study, poring over forbidden texts until their eyes strain and their minds begin to fray at the edges, learning to decipher knowledge that was never meant for mortal comprehension. Meanwhile, an acolyte of Sanguine might complete their training in a single night of revelry, so intense, so boundary-shattering that they emerge fundamentally changed, their former inhibitions burned away like morning mist. The classification of devoted worshippers extends beyond simple ranks. There are the zealots who have given everything to their prince, dwelling permanently at shrines or in hidden temples, their entire existence centered around worship and the anticipation of their prince's favor. There are the casual supplicants who make offerings only when they need something, approaching Daedric shrines with the same transactional mindset one might bring to a merchant's stall. Then, there are the unwitting servants, those who fulfill a prince's purposes without even realizing they serve Daedric interests at all. The perfect pawns in games played across centuries. Among the more specialized roles within these cults are the oracles and seers, individuals who claim to receive visions directly from their prince. Some of these are genuine conduits for Daedric communication, their minds touched by Oblivion itself, speaking prophecies that may take generations to unfold. Others are charlatans who have learned to speak in the ambiguous language of prophecy, maintaining their positions through careful observation and political acumen rather than any true supernatural gift. The truly skilled oracle learns to blend both, reading the subtle signs their prince sends, while also maintaining enough mystery to preserve their authority within the cult hierarchy. Ritual specialists occupy another crucial niche within Daedric organizations. These are not necessarily the most devout or the most powerful, but they are the most knowledgeable about the specific ceremonies, offerings, and protocols required to successfully commune with a particular prince. A ritual specialist for Molag Bal knows precisely how to arrange a shrine for maximum efficacy, understands the exact phrasing of invocations that catch the Lord of Domination's attention, and can identify which mortals would make the most pleasing offerings. They are scholars of cruelty and devotion, their expertise making them invaluable even to those who might outrank them in the cult hierarchy. The selection of a Daedric champion represents one of the most significant events in any cult's existence. When a prince chooses a mortal to receive one of their legendary artifacts, it is rarely a simple matter of favoritism. Each prince has their own criteria, their own testing methods that reveal the qualities they find most appealing. Azura, for instance, might select a champion who demonstrates unwavering loyalty and a capacity for seeing beyond surface appearances, someone who can navigate the twilight between endings and beginnings. Her champion must prove they understand that dusk and dawn are not opposites but reflections, that death and rebirth are part of an eternal cycle. Meridia's selection process often involves testing a potential champion's dedication to destroying undead abominations. She does not simply want a warrior capable of slaying the unliving. She wants someone who understands the fundamental wrongness of creatures that pervert the natural order, someone who feels visceral revulsion at the sight of corpses animated by necromantic force. Her champion must be willing to cleanse the world of such aberrations with holy fire, to stand as a beacon against the darkness that threatens to consume all living things. The testing methods employed by Daedric Princes in champion selection can be brutally straightforward or maddeningly complex. Markarth, the prince of the spurned and ostracized, might demand that a potential champion complete a task while facing overwhelming odds, proving they can triumph despite being outnumbered and underestimated. The trial itself matters less than the demonstration of strength in the face of rejection, of refusing to accept defeat even when the world has abandoned you. Sheogorath's champion selection is predictably unpredictable. The Mad God might choose someone based on criteria that makes sense only within the twisted logic of madness, perhaps someone who laughs when they should weep, who finds order in chaos and chaos in order, who can navigate the Shivering Isles without losing themselves entirely to mania or dementia. Or he might select a champion on a complete whim, for reasons even the prince himself might not remember moments later, because what is madness if not the abandonment of consistent reasoning? There are instances throughout Tamrielic history of princes maintaining multiple champions simultaneously, each serving different purposes or operating in different regions. Nocturnal, in particular, has been known to grant her favor to several mortals at once, each receiving different blessings or artifacts. The Nightingales serve as her sworn protectors, bound by oaths that extend beyond death itself, while other champions might receive the gray cowl of Nocturnal or similar relics, each fulfilling different roles in the Mistress of Shadow's incomprehensible plans. The consequences for failed champions vary as wildly as the princes themselves. Some princes simply withdraw their favor, leaving former champions to face their enemies, many of whom were made during the champion's service without supernatural protection. Molag Bal, being the king of rape and master of domination, often subjects failed champions to fates worse than simple death. They might find themselves transformed into soul-shriven husks, their essences trapped in Cold Harbor for eternity, serving as cautionary tales to future potential champions. Mehrunes Dagon might cast a failed champion into the churning destruction of the Deadlands, where they are unmade and remade in endless cycles of agony. Throughout the eras, certain champions have achieved legendary status, their deeds recorded in histories both official and hidden. During the Oblivion Crisis, the champion of Cyrodiil became champion to multiple Daedric Princes, collecting artifacts and completing quests for beings who normally would never allow a single mortal to serve competing interests. This unprecedented situation revealed something crucial about Daedric politics. The princes are not unified, do not share information freely, and can be played against one another by a sufficiently cunning mortal. The operational structures surrounding Daedric shrines represent another layer of organization within these cults. The position of Shrine Keeper is typically granted to someone who has demonstrated both devotion and practical competence. They must be trusted to maintain the shrine during the long periods between summonings, to keep the altar clean and properly arranged, to ensure that casual travelers or curious adventurers do not stumble upon sacred spaces meant only for true worshippers. In Skyrim, where Daedric worship is tolerated but not celebrated, shrine keepers often live double lives, appearing as ordinary citizens while secretly maintaining places of power hidden in caves, ruins, or remote wilderness locations. The collection and management of offerings requires careful attention and sometimes considerable creativity. Each Daedric prince has specific preferences. Namira appreciates offerings of death and decay, while Azura might prefer flowers that bloom at twilight or items of particular aesthetic beauty. The shrine keeper must not only know what offerings are appropriate, but also how to acquire them without drawing unwanted attention. In regions where Daedric worship is actively persecuted, this can mean establishing networks of suppliers, creating cover stories for unusual purchases, and developing protocols for safely disposing of offerings after rituals are complete. Summoning days are perhaps the most crucial aspect of shrine operation, the specific dates when each prince is most likely to manifest or respond to mortal supplication. These days are not arbitrary. They correspond to celestial alignments, to dates of historical significance, to moments when the barriers between Mundus and Oblivion grow thin enough for easier communication. A competent shrine keeper maintains meticulous records of these dates, often coded in ways that would mean nothing to casual observers, but allow true worshippers to know when to make their pilgrimages. The concealment of shrines has become an art form in regions where Daedric worship invites persecution or suspicion. Some shrines are hidden in plain sight, disguised as monuments to the divines or tucked into corners of Nordic ruins where most adventurers focus on the more obvious dangers of Draugr and traps. Others are buried deep underground, accessible only through cave systems that require intimate knowledge of local geography to navigate. The most sophisticated concealment methods involve magical wards that make shrines literally invisible to those not attuned to specific Daedric energies, ensuring only true seekers can find their way to places of worship. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. Pilgrimage route management represents yet another layer of complexity in shrine operations, particularly for the more prominent Daedric cults. These routes must be maintained in a state of careful ambiguity, known to devoted followers, but obscured enough that casual travelers won't accidentally stumble upon sacred sites. In Skyrim's harsh climate, this often means ensuring that paths remain passable after snowfalls without making them so obvious that they appear on trader maps. Shrine keepers and their trusted assistants might mark routes with subtle signs, a particular arrangement of stones, scratches on tree bark that look natural to the untrained eye, or cairns that seem like simple wayfinding markers but actually encode specific information about which prince the shrine serves and what offerings are currently needed. The Mythic Dawn stands as perhaps the most infamous Daedric cult in recent memory, their attempted destruction of Tamriel during the Oblivion Crisis, still fresh in historical consciousness. What many don't realize is the sophistication of their organizational structure, a hierarchy built upon Mankar Cameron's interpretation of the Mysterium Xarxes, that reality-warping tome gifted by Mehrunes Dagon himself. The cult's ranking system was based on advancement through understanding the commentaries, those 4 volumes of apocalyptic philosophy that Cameron distributed across Cyrodiil. New initiates would study the first commentary, learning to see the world as Cameron did, as a prison created by false gods, with Mehrunes Dagon representing not destruction, but liberation through cosmic rebirth. As cultists progressed through the commentaries, they advanced through ranks that remained deliberately obscure to outsiders. There were the sponsors, trusted members who recruited new initiates by identifying those disillusioned with the Empire, those who felt powerless or invisible in society's structure. These sponsors attended seemingly innocuous book clubs and philosophical gatherings, slowly introducing Cameron's ideas to those who seemed receptive. Above them were the doorkeepers, cultists who had proven their dedication through violent acts against the established order, who maintained the secret meeting places and ensured that gatherings remained undetected by the Blades or Imperial authorities. The sleeper agent cells represented the Mythic Dawn's most insidious element. These were cultists who maintained completely ordinary lives. They served as merchants, guards, servants in noble houses, even as Legion soldiers. They might go years without receiving activation orders, simply living their cover identities while slowly gathering information or positioning themselves for maximum impact when the Oblivion Crisis finally began. Some sleeper agents were so deep in their covers that they genuinely forgot their true allegiances until triggered by specific phrases from the commentaries. Their minds compartmentalized through a combination of psychological conditioning and Daedric influence. Admission to Paradise, Mankar Cameron's personal realm within Mehrunes Dagon's Deadlands, was presented as the ultimate reward for faithful service. Only the most devoted cultists were promised entry, though the reality of Paradise was far more complex than the eternal bliss Cameron advertised. To gain admission, a cultist had to willingly sacrifice themselves, drinking poison or submitting to ritual murder performed by their brothers and sisters in the cult. This requirement served multiple purposes. It ensured absolute commitment, eliminated any possibility of betrayal, and provided Cameron with a realm populated by souls who had already demonstrated their willingness to die for the cause. The Mythic Dawn's assassination units operated with ruthless efficiency during the crisis. These were not random murderers, but carefully trained killers who studied their targets extensively, learning habits and routines, identifying vulnerabilities in security arrangements. The assassination of Emperor Uriel Septim VII and his heirs required coordination across multiple cells, with each unit responsible for different targets, operating independently to ensure that if one cell was compromised, the others could still complete their missions. The discipline required for such operations speaks to the sophistication of the Mythic Dawn's training programs and the absolute control Cameron wielded over his followers. After the Oblivion Crisis failed, and Cameron was slain, the Mythic Dawn hierarchy collapsed rapidly. Without their charismatic leader and with Paradise revealed as a lie, most surviving cultists either fled into hiding or renounced their allegiance entirely. However, fragments of the organization persisted, scattered cells that still believed in the commentary's philosophy, still saw Mehrunes Dagon as a liberating force rather than a destructive one. These remnants became increasingly desperate and unhinged, lacking the central direction that had once made them so formidable. In Morrowind, the relationship between Daedric worship and cultural identity becomes far more complicated, particularly regarding the so-called House of Troubles, Molag Bal, Mehrunes Dagon, Sheogorath, and Malakath. These princes were officially designated as enemies of the Dunmer people, contrasted against the good Daedra, Azura, Boethiah, and Mephala, who were credited with teaching the Chimer the skills necessary for survival and transformation into the Dunmer. Yet persecution of the House of Troubles cults was never absolute, never completely successful, because fear and prohibition often breed fascination. Hidden worship practices for the House of Troubles developed in the shadows of Morrowind's temple-dominated society. Molag Bal, despised as the father of vampires and the corrupter of the pure, nevertheless attracted followers drawn to his promises of power through domination. These cultists met in abandoned corners of Dwemer ruins, in the deepest levels of ancestral tombs where even the most pious Dunmer feared to tread, performing rituals that would have seen them executed if discovered by the ordinators. The psychological profile of a House of Troubles cultist in Morrowind was often complex. They were rebels against religious authority, seekers of forbidden power, or individuals who had experienced trauma that made conventional Dunmer faith feel hollow. Syncretistic adaptations allowed some House of Troubles worship to continue in forms barely recognizable as Daedric veneration. Clever cultists would frame their devotion in terms of understanding the enemy, of studying darkness to better combat it. A priest might maintain a small shrine to Mehrunes Dagon under the pretense of researching methods to prevent future disasters, all while secretly making proper offerings and prayers. This theological camouflage required extensive knowledge of both temple doctrine and Daedric lore, the ability to speak in double meanings that satisfied religious authorities while still honoring the princes they supposedly opposed. Underground temple networks existed throughout Morrowind, though calling them temples might be generous. These were often natural caverns expanded through magic and manual labor, connected by tunnels that honeycombed beneath cities and ashlands alike. Some of these networks dated back to before the tribunal's rise to power, ancient places where Chimer had worshipped without shame. The temples were kept deliberately Spartan, easily abandoned if discovered, with portable altars and offerings that could be moved on short notice. The Dunmer's own skill with architecture and stonework made these spaces eerily beautiful despite their hidden nature. Columns carved from volcanic rock, altars positioned beneath natural skylights that allowed specific stars to shine down during summoning ceremonies. Boethiah's cult structures embody the Prince of Plot's essential nature. They are built on betrayal, on the understanding that treachery is not merely accepted, but celebrated as the highest form of worship. The Tournament of Ten Bloods represents Boethiah's most direct method of selecting worthy champions. The tournament is not a formal, organized event, but rather a challenge issued to groups of devotees. Gather 10 followers, lead them to believe they serve a common purpose, then orchestrate their deaths through deception and combat. The last survivor earns Boethiah's attention and potentially the Ebony Mail, that legendary armor that poisons those who stand too close, shrouding its wearer in toxic mist. The organization required for such tournaments is minimal by design. Boethiah has no interest in bureaucratic structures or hierarchical control. Instead, the prince simply issues challenges to those who seem worthy, often through visions or through intermediaries who might themselves be unaware they serve Daedric purposes. What structure does exist comes from those who have successfully completed tournaments and now serve as informal mentors to new aspirants, teaching them the arts of manipulation and strategic betrayal, while fully expecting that their students might someday turn these lessons against them. The Sacellum of Boethiah, a remote shrine in Skyrim's mountains, operates under the guidance of whoever currently holds Boethiah's favor. There is no permanent priesthood, no established succession. Instead, the shrine keeper position goes to whoever last impressed the prince, who might hold the role for years or mere days depending on Boethiah's whims. This creates a constant atmosphere of paranoia and competition among devotees who gather there, each seeking opportunities to demonstrate superior cunning while guarding against others' schemes. The Ebony Mail succession follows no predictable pattern. Unlike artifacts passed down through bloodlines or organizational hierarchies, the mail goes to whoever Boethiah deems worthy at any given moment. A current bearer might be killed by a challenger who then claims the armor, or Boethiah might simply withdraw favor, leaving a former champion vulnerable to all the enemies they made while wearing divine protection. Some champions have worn the mail for entire lifetimes, becoming legendary figures whispered about in taverns, while others died within weeks, victims of their own overconfidence or superior opponents. Cultist combat trials at Boethiah's shrines serve both as worship and as practical training. Devotees spar with one another using real weapons, understanding that injury or death is not just possible but expected. The prince appreciates skill in combat but prizes cunning more highly. The fighter who wins through a clever feint or by exploiting an opponent's overconfidence pleases Boethiah more than the simple brute who relies on strength alone. These trials create a warrior culture among Boethiah's followers, a shared understanding that survival requires both martial prowess and tactical thinking. Nocturnal's relationship with the Thieves Guild represents a different model of Daedric organization entirely, one built on oaths that transcend individual lives. The Nightingale Trinity structure is elegant in its simplicity and terrible in its binding nature. 3 mortals at a time serve as Nocturnal's sworn protectors, granted supernatural abilities in exchange for serving as guardians of the Twilight Sepulchre, and, ultimately, surrendering their souls to guard the Ebonmere for eternity after death. The Trinity is self-perpetuating. When one Nightingale dies or can no longer serve, the survivors recruit a replacement, binding them through ancient ceremonies performed in darkness beneath the shadow of Nocturnal's effigy. The Twilight Sepulchre guardianship extends beyond simply protecting a physical location. The Sepulchre serves as the focal point of Nocturnal's influence over Mundus, the place where her realm of Evergloam presses closest to the mortal world. Guardians must maintain the sanctity of this threshold, ensuring that other Daedric princes don't attempt to exploit it, that mortal thieves don't stumble upon powers they cannot comprehend, that the skeleton key, should it return to its proper place, remains secure. This guardianship requires vigilance, combat skills, stealth expertise, and an intimate understanding of both Daedric nature and mortal psychology. The Skeleton Key's keeper protocols highlight the complex relationship between Nocturnal and her artifacts. Unlike other Daedric princes who jealously guard their relics, Nocturnal allows the key to wander, to fall into mortal hands, understanding that its absence creates challenges that test both her followers and potential future servants. When the key is stolen, as it inevitably is, the Nightingales must recover it, though Nocturnal shows remarkable patience about timelines, operating on the Immortal's understanding that decades or even centuries are brief moments in cosmic terms. If this story has kept you listening this far, and you want more of these whispered tales from Tamriel, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Skyrim lores. Luck blessing distribution within the Thieves Guild operates through mechanisms most members don't fully understand, attributing their success to skill rather than divine favor. When the guild thrives, when scores succeed with improbable frequency and close calls resolve in the thieves' favor, this is Nocturnal's shadow falling across their endeavors. The mechanism flows through the guildmaster, who maintains a connection to Nocturnal, whether they realize it or not, and radiates outward to members in good standing. When the guild falters, when luck turns sour and simple jobs go catastrophically wrong, it often indicates that Nocturnal has withdrawn her blessing, displeased with some failure or betrayal within the organization's ranks. The Grey Cowl of Nocturnal represents a different lineage entirely, a succession built on legendary infamy rather than sworn oaths. The cowl erases its wearer's identity from the world's memory, making them literally unknowable while worn. A blessing and curse combined. Its succession has been violent and irregular throughout history, passing from legendary thieves to ambitious upstarts who managed to steal it, each wearer adding to the cowl's mythology while losing themselves to its curse. Some wore it for years, becoming ghost stories whispered in every city from Skyrim to Hammerfell. Others died within days, victims of their own hubris or hunted down by previous owners' enemies who saw the cowl as their only chance for recognition of crimes they could never otherwise prove. Namira's cannibal covens operate in the deepest shadows of civilized society, hidden not in remote wilderness but beneath cities, in the spaces between the world-polite people see and the reality of hunger, decay, and forbidden consumption. The taste of death ritual, central to Namira's worship, establishes a hierarchy based on willingness to embrace what others find most revolting. New initiates might begin by consuming carrion, meat already rotting, fighting. Their gag reflex as they learn to find beauty in putrefaction. Those who prove themselves through these initial trials advance to more transgressive acts, the consumption of humanoid flesh, participation in feasts where the recently deceased become the main course. The rank structure within these covens is rarely formalized, operating more through shared understanding than official titles. There are those who merely attend the feasts, passive participants seeking the blessing of the Ring of Namira, or simply fulfilling dark hungers they cannot satisfy elsewhere. Above them stand the preparers, cultists who handle the procurement and preparation of corpses, who know how to butcher humanoid bodies and which cuts are most prized in Namira's sight. The highest rank belongs to those who have consumed while the victim still lived, who have looked into dying eyes while committing the ultimate taboo, whose devotion to Namira eclipsed every instinct of civilized behavior. Corpse procurement systems vary by region and coven. In cities, cultists might work as undertakers or gravekeepers, positions that provide legitimate access to the dead while allowing them to divert bodies to unholy purposes. Some covens maintain contracts with assassins' guilds or criminal organizations, purchasing bodies no one will miss, vagrants, criminals, foreigners passing through with no local connections. The most brazen covens hunt actively, selecting victims with care, taking only those whose disappearances will spark minimal investigation. A street urchin, a beggar, an elderly hermit living on society's margins. These become offerings to Namira's grotesque appetites. Secret feast organizations require meticulous planning and absolute discretion. The feasts themselves cannot be held in the same location repeatedly without inviting discovery, so covens rotate between safe houses, abandoned buildings, and natural caverns that can be accessed without drawing attention. The preparations begin days in advance, acquiring the corpse, preparing the ritual space, sending coded invitations to members deemed trustworthy enough to attend. During the feast itself, watchers are posted to ensure no intruders stumble upon the gathering, ready to dispose of witnesses or, if necessary, abandon the location entirely and scatter into the night. The Ring of Namira distribution follows a pattern common to many Daedric artifacts. It is granted to those who prove exceptional devotion, then withdrawn when it serves the prince's purposes or when the bearer grows complacent. A cultist who receives the ring gains heightened stamina and the ability to consume raw flesh without illness, blessings that seem minor until one realizes how they enable the bearer to fully embrace Namira's sphere. The ring bearer often becomes the de facto leader of their coven, not through any official appointment but simply through the authority that comes from visibly possessing their prince's favor. In Markarth, buried beneath the warrens where the city's poorest struggle to survive, a cannibal coven operated for years with the tacit knowledge, if not outright approval, of certain city officials. The coven members included seemingly respectable citizens, individuals who attended market days and temple services while harboring appetites that would see them executed if exposed. This particular coven structure relied on the city's existing class divisions. The poor disappeared regularly enough that a few more vanishings barely registered, while the wealthy members provided protection, wealth, and access to spaces where the feasts could occur without fear of discovery. Azura's prophecy cults represent a stark contrast to the darkness of Namira's followers, yet their organizational structures reveal similar patterns of devotion and hierarchy. The Star of Azura, that soul gem of impossible beauty, capable of capturing souls without suffering corruption, passes through keeper traditions stretching back to the Merethic era. These keepers are selected not through combat or cunning, but through demonstrated understanding of Azura's nature, the balance between light and dark, beginning and ending, the eternal cycle of dawn and dusk. A keeper might serve for their entire lifetime, maintaining the star in a hidden shrine, using it only when Azura's will demands, understanding that its power is borrowed rather than owned. Dawn and dusk prayer hierarchies structure the daily worship of Azura's devoted followers. The most committed cultists orient their entire lives around these liminal moments, rising before dawn to witness the transition from night to day, gathering again as evening approaches to watch darkness reclaim the sky. Within this practice exists a natural hierarchy. Those who never miss a prayer session, who have maintained this discipline for years or decades, earn respect and authority within the cult. They become the interpreters of Azura's will, the voices that speak with confidence about what their prince desires, because they have devoted so much of their finite mortal existence to observing the transitions she embodies. For the Khajiit, Azura, known to them as Azura, occupies a position of supreme importance, the deity who shaped them from the forest people into their current forms, who gave them the gift of changing shape with the moon's phases. The integration of Khajiit Azura worship into broader Azura cult structures creates fascinating syncretism. Khajiit pilgrims journey to Azura's shrines across Tamriel, bringing their own traditions and perspectives, sometimes clashing with but often enriching the worship practices of human and mere followers. Some shrines have developed hybrid practices, incorporating Khajiit moon sugar offerings alongside more traditional gifts, blending Ta'agra prayers with Tamrielic invocations. Prophecy interpretation councils form among Azura's most learned devotees, scholars who study her previous prophecies, looking for patterns and principles that might illuminate current visions. These councils lack formal authority. Azura speaks to whom she chooses, and her pronouncements require no validation from mortal committees. Yet the councils serve crucial functions nonetheless, helping distinguish genuine prophetic visions from fever dreams or delusions, contextualizing new prophecies within the framework of Azura's historical patterns, and sometimes identifying connections between seemingly unrelated visions received by different seers. Vision-sharing rituals allow Azura's followers to experience fragments of the prophetic dreams granted to her chosen seers. These rituals typically involve deep meditation, often enhanced by alchemical preparations that open the mind to supernatural influences, conducted during the precise moments of dawn or dusk when Azura's presence feels strongest. Participants describe experiencing fleeting images, emotional impressions, or symbolic visions that feel both intimately personal and cosmically significant, though interpreting these shared visions requires the same careful analysis applied to more direct prophecies. Hermaeus Mora's knowledge seekers represent perhaps the most dangerous of Daedric cults, not because they commit violence, though some do, but because they trade in forbidden information, in secrets that can unmake minds and reshape reality. The appointment of Black Book Guardians follows no democratic process, no hereditary succession. Instead, Hermaeus Mora selects individuals who demonstrate both the intellectual capacity to comprehend what they guard and the psychological resilience to read these reality-warping tomes without losing themselves entirely to madness. Some guardians are scholars who spent lifetimes seeking esoteric knowledge, only to find themselves bound to service once they finally grasped truths they had pursued. Others are chosen seemingly at random, plucked from obscurity, and thrust into guardianship of books whose contents they can barely comprehend. Access levels to Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's endless library realm, operate on principles of knowledge and worthiness rather than rank or position. A novice seeker who demonstrates particular insight into a specific subject might be granted access to sections of Apocrypha relevant to their expertise, while being barred from countless other wings and chambers. Meanwhile, a devoted cultist who has served for decades might find themselves perpetually denied entry to certain collections because they lack the mental frameworks necessary to survive the knowledge contained within. Hermaeus Mora hoards knowledge, but also understands that information has value only when it can be comprehended. There is no point in showing calculus to someone who cannot count. Forbidden knowledge hierarchies within Mora's cult create strange inversions of typical power structures. A relatively new cultist who has mastered a particularly obscure language might hold more practical authority than a high priest, simply because they can translate texts no one else can read. Someone who has survived reading a black book and returned with their sanity mostly intact becomes invaluable regardless of their social status or length of service. This creates a cult culture that values intellectual achievement over traditional markers of devotion, where the ability to uncover and survive dangerous knowledge matters more than years of prayer or numbers of offerings made. The seeker transformation process represents the ultimate fate of many who delve too deeply into Hermaeus Mora's mysteries. These are individuals who spent so much time in Apocrypha, absorbed so much forbidden knowledge, that they began transforming physically and mentally into something no longer quite mortal. The transformation is gradual, tentacles sprouting from flesh, eyes multiplying, thoughts becoming fractured across multiple simultaneous perspectives. Some cultists actively seek this transformation, viewing it as ascension, as becoming one with infinite knowledge. Others fight desperately against it, realizing too late that the knowledge they pursued has consumed their humanity. The conflict between Hermaeus Mora's knowledge seekers and the Skal represents a clash between fundamentally incompatible worldviews. The Skal possess ancient secrets, wisdom passed down through generations, maintained through oral tradition rather than written text. To Hermaeus Mora, this represents an intolerable gap in his collection, knowledge that exists but remains outside his library. The cultists sent to extract these secrets from the Skal employed methods ranging from scholarly persuasion to outright mental domination, seeking to break the Skal's cultural resistance to sharing their wisdom. The Skal's shamans served as secret keepers, individuals trained to withstand psychological and supernatural pressure. to die rather than reveal what Mora desired. Molag Bal's vampire orders structure themselves around the concept of domination, not merely physical control, but the complete subjugation of will, the transformation of individuals into extensions of the Daedric Prince's power. Pure-blood vampire creation is reserved for those who serve Molag Bal with exceptional devotion or who possess qualities the prince finds particularly useful. The process involves violation both physical and spiritual, the victim held in Cold Harbor, while Molag Bal personally inflicts the curse of vampirism. These purebloods possess powers far exceeding those of vampires created through disease transmission, able to transform into vampire lords, walking nightmares that combine humanoid cunning with monstrous strength. Vampire lord hierarchies operate on brutal simplicity. The strong dominate the weak, the ancient command the newly turned, and all ultimately serve Molag Bal's designs. Yet within these hierarchies exist subtle gradations of power and influence. A vampire lord who has existed for millennia accumulates not just personal power, but networks of thralls, hidden layers, and political influence. They become forces unto themselves, still bound to Molag Bal, but operating with considerable autonomy in pursuing their own goals, provided these goals don't directly contradict their prince's will. The Volkihar clan structure in Skyrim demonstrates how vampire organizations adapt to regional conditions. Hidden in Castle Volkihar, protected by the ice flows of the Sea of Ghosts, the clan maintained rigid internal hierarchies under Lord Harkon's rule. The purebloods formed an aristocracy, viewing lesser vampires as little better than cattle. Below them came the turned vampires, those granted the gift through blood rather than Molag Bal's direct intervention. Lower still were the thralls, mortals kept under magical domination, serving as food sources, servants, and occasionally pleasure slaves. This structure mirrored mortal feudal systems, perhaps mockingly, creating a twisted reflection of the society vampires had abandoned or been expelled from. Soul-harvesting organizations under Molag Bal's direction exist to feed the prince's endless appetite for mortal souls. These aren't random murders, but carefully orchestrated operations designed to capture souls at moments of maximum despair and violation, when the victim's essence is most saturated with the suffering Molag Bal finds nourishing. Some vampire cults maintain soul traps and black soul gems specifically for this purpose, collecting essences to offer to their prince during dark rituals. The logistics of such operations require secrecy, magical expertise, and absolute ruthlessness, qualities that Molag Bal's followers cultivate with practiced dedication. Communication methods with Cold Harbor vary in complexity and danger. Simple prayers might reach Molag Bal's attention if the prince happens to be paying attention, though more often they vanish into the void unheard. More reliable methods involve ritual sacrifice performed at specific shrines during certain celestial alignments, creating temporary channels through which Molag Bal's will can manifest. The most direct communication comes to the prince's chosen champions, who might receive visions, hear whispered commands, or even be physically pulled into Cold Harbor for face-to-face audiences with the King of Rape. Sanguine's revelry cults reject the grim seriousness of most Daedric worship, instead embracing hedonism, excess, and the complete abandonment of inhibition. The Sanguine Rose Keeper selection reflects the prince's priorities. The artifact typically goes to someone who demonstrates exceptional capacity for debauchery while maintaining enough presence of mind to orchestrate truly memorable parties. A drunk who passes out after 3 bottles of wine holds no interest for Sanguine, but someone who can drink a dozen bottles while simultaneously conducting complex social manipulations, turning a simple gathering into legendary bacchanal, that catches the prince's attention. Debauchery festival organization requires skills that seem frivolous until one considers the logistics involved. A truly successful Sanguine festival must provide enough excess to satisfy the prince, enough alcohol, food, carnal opportunities, and boundary-pushing experiences to transform participants. This means securing venues, acquiring massive quantities of consumables, ensuring participants' safety just enough to prevent premature deaths that would end the festivities, and maintaining secrecy from authorities who would certainly shut down such gatherings if they learned of them in advance. Tavern infiltration networks allow Sanguine's followers to identify potential new cultists and recruit individuals who might appreciate the prince's gifts. A cultist might work as a bartender, observing patrons, noting who drinks with abandon, who seeks connection and pleasure without shame. These observations feed into broader networks, information shared between cultists across regions, creating informal catalogs of individuals who might be receptive to Sanguine's brand of worship. The best infiltrators can turn an ordinary tavern into a recruitment ground without the establishment's owners ever realizing their business serves Daedric purposes. Invitations to the Misty Grove, Sanguine's personal pocket realm of endless celebration, are granted seemingly at random but actually follow the prince's inscrutable sense of who deserves such rewards. Those who receive invitations describe being pulled from Mundus mid-revel, finding themselves in a realm where the wine never runs dry, where every desire finds satisfaction, where time becomes meaningless in the face of perpetual pleasure. Some return changed, unable to find satisfaction in ordinary mortal indulgences. Others never return at all, lost in Sanguine's domain, whether by choice or because the prince decided they were too entertaining to release. Party planning hierarchies within Sanguine's cults are simultaneously absurd and deadly serious. There are the visionaries who conceive impossible celebrations, the logistics coordinators who somehow make these visions real, the entertainers who keep events from growing stale, and the cleaners who handle aftermath and ensure no evidence remains that might draw unwanted attention. Each role requires dedication and skill, and failure can mean losing Sanguine's favor, a devastating blow for those who have built their entire identities around serving the Prince of Pleasure. Regional variations in Daedric cult operations reveal how geography, culture, and local laws shape worship practices. In Skyrim, where Daedric veneration is tolerated but not celebrated, most shrines hide in wilderness locations, caves, mountain peaks, ruins claimed back from the Draugr and repurposed for living worship. The harsh climate actually aids concealment, as few casual dansas patitumas. Travelers venture far from established roads during winter months when snowstorms can kill within hours. Skyrim's cults tend toward independence, each shrine operating autonomously rather than as part of larger networks, connected more through shared devotion to particular princes than through formal organizational structures. Cyrodiil, by contrast, historically allowed more open Daedric worship, with shrines existing in known locations that pilgrims could visit without fear of legal persecution. This openness created different organizational patterns, cults that could maintain more permanent structures, develop more elaborate hierarchies, coordinate activities across multiple shrines. The Oblivion Crisis changed this dramatically, creating backlash against all Daedric worship regardless of which prince was involved. Post-crisis Cyrodiil saw many cults driven underground, their previous openness becoming liability, forcing organizational structures to adapt towards secrecy models more common in places like Morrowind. Morrowind's anti-Daedra policies, enforced by the Temple with varying degrees of rigor depending on which Daedric prince was involved, created a culture of hidden worship and theological complexity. The distinction between good Daedra and House of Troubles meant that Azura, Boethiah, and Mephala worship could occur relatively openly, while Molag Bal or Mehrunes Dagon cultists risked execution if discovered. This created strange dynamics where some cultists practiced their devotion publicly under the guise of good Daedra worship while secretly honoring princes the temple condemned, their prayers coded in ways that allowed plausible deniability if questioned. In Black Marsh, the relationship between the Hist, those ancient sentient trees that guide Argonian society, and Daedric princes creates syncretism found nowhere else in Tamriel. Some Argonian cults blend Hist-derived spirituality with Daedric worship, viewing the princes as forces that exist alongside, rather than in opposition to the Hist's influence. These hybrid practices confuse outsiders who expect clear boundaries between different supernatural entities, but for Argonians immersed in the Hist's collective consciousness, such distinctions may seem arbitrary. The organizational structures of these cults reflect Argonian social patterns, operating through consensus and psychic connection rather than rigid hierarchies. High Rock's witch covens demonstrate yet another integration pattern, blending traditional Breton magic practices with Daedric worship. Many covens maintain connections to specific princes. Hircine for covens focused on transformation magic, Namira for those exploring decay and entropy, Nocturnal for covens specializing in shadow manipulation. These covens often exist semi-openly, tolerated by local nobility who recognize the useful services they provide: healing, divination, curse breaking, while carefully not inquiring too deeply into the sources of their power. The organizational structures mirror noble houses, with matriarchs ruling covens, apprentices learning through years of service, and careful attention to lineages and succession. As the night deepens and these whispered tales of hierarchies and devotions draw toward their close, one truth becomes clear: the Daedric princes may be immortal and incomprehensible, but their mortal followers are entirely human, creating structures that reflect both their princes' natures and their own needs for meaning, power, and belonging in a world where the gods are real and their attention is both blessing and curse.